This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders who are designing the future. Hola, I am Joe Pardavila, and today's guest is Kris Erickson, the co-founder of Workforce Science Associates and a leading voice on employee engagement and experience. In her book, The Enduring Impact, she blends 3 decades of research and real-world advising to show leaders how to turn workforce data into cultures people want to be a part of. Drawing from one of the largest global employee feedback databases, Kris makes the case that trust, meaning, and leadership shape whether people thrive or check out at work. Kris, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm excellent. And I want to start our conversation talking about the idea of engagement, which I think for folks outside of like culture, engagement always has to do with weddings, nuptials. But this idea of engagement and engaging your team and talent, I want to know if this is a chicken or the egg thing, because I know you've been studying this for a long time, built your career on it. I'm not going to date you, but you've been doing it for a while. What
It's okay. You can say 30 years.
Okay, 30 years. What came first? You being engaged / disengaged in something, or the studying of engagement came first? Because I'm trying to get a level set of where you started on this journey.
Well, I think all of us, it's personal in the very beginning. You either love what you do or you don't. And I always thought growing up that I was selfish because I didn't want to just do any job. I wanted to do something that I thought was fun and interesting and intriguing. And turns out that is a very clear portion of what engagement is. And so I just feel that there are people in this world who have never had those experiences of saying, I really like what I do, that for them, work is just that. It is a job, and they feel that it needs to be a chore. And I feel really bad for those people. And really that kind of drove my passion to understand, how can you measure this? Can you give a leader really clear information that can help them create those experiences that do lead to fulfillment? So I think it's personal, but then I think it really is upon organizations and anyone who leads teams. That should be the first thing that you think about when leading your people.
And you weren't kidding. You weren't going to just take any job or be happy. Things were not easy for you at the beginning. You write about having to dig in your pockets to find 85 cents to pay for gas, which I'm assuming you didn't get a lot of gas for 85 cents. But tell me about what those hard moments taught you about the importance of purpose and pride in a job, and not just doing something for the sake of doing it, making sure that whatever you're doing in life, you're being fulfilled with it.
And it for me, it was it just didn't match my value system, right? That I never thought in all of my years that I would literally be looking for 85 cents to put into my gas tank. And it was that moment where I just said to myself, I can't do this anymore. I have to kind of take charge of my life, what's important to me, what's important to my son. And that really set me off on, I've got to find work that I believe to be meaningful, but also challenging. And that at the end of the day, I can say that I'm proud to be doing. And that is one of those pivotal moments. And we talk about it a lot in the book, that sometimes it's those adverse moments where you really take stock and understand, I have to be better. I have to be better for me. But more importantly, I had to be better for my son. And what we just know about this concept of engagement, when people are engaged in meaningful, purposeful work. And by the way, that can be on a manufacturing floor in a car plant. I've talked to those employees before, and what they'll tell me is, if I do my job right and well, I'm building a vehicle for a family that someday may drive it, and it's going to be a safer vehicle because of me. And so when you think about that whole concept of engagement, you are a better person. And what I mean by that is, highly engaged people are better coworkers, they're better spouses, they're better friends, they're better parents, and truly the end game for us here at WSA is that we make communities better. When we know we have organizations that are firing on all cylinders with this concept of engagement, They're a much better run company, but they're just better out in those communities in which they live and in which they serve. And that to me, I've had people tell me that that's a Pollyannish view, but that really is what gets me excited because I know we are making a difference. And by the way, couldn't we use more of that now?
No doubt. And I wonder because you mentioned the fact that people they see it as a Pollyannish image, but to me, I almost see it like looking at engagement in a vacuum. Because if you look at just the things you can control in your job and your work life, whether it's how your boss treats you, how your teammates treat you, that's the vacuum. But then you have this stuff that sort of seeps outside, and that's like an economy that's struggling, AI taking people's jobs. How does the unknown and the future affect you talk about the people that work in plants, and they know that they're the first to be cut. They are those are so how does like people not worrying so much about the future affect their present day engagement?
There's a critical role in organizations, and that is senior leadership. So you think about the C-suite. And in the book, we talk about it. Leaders who are really crystal clear on what we call strategic alignment. They will win with their workforces. They will cause them to feel more calm and be able to weather the storm. And there are three magic questions that any CEO, anyone in the C-suite should absolutely know the answers to. Where are we headed as an organization? People want to know yes, you can't predict the future, but what do you see that future looking like, and how different is that from where we are right now? So where are we going? This is the most important of the three magical questions. Why? Why are we going in that particular direction? And I think that a lot of senior leaders are really smart people, but they forget to talk about the why because why brings purpose to work and it helps make sense of the direction that we're headed in. And then the third is, what does that mean for me, the individual employee? And if we can have leaders who can paint the picture on all three of those levels, then the employee is much more capable and apt to say, okay, I'm going to come I'm on board and I'll have faith. We may have to course correct. We may have to change directions, but if people get bought in to that alignment and where we're headed, we tend to see that engagement remains really strong and people have less of a fear of the future. And just think about what we've all gone through in the past 7 years. I mean, I had leaders literally saying to me, I am teaching math to my eighth grader at our kitchen table, and I never thought I'd have to do that because of COVID, right?
Right.
And I had one leader, and this stuck with me in the midst of all this chaos. He addressed his entire organization and said two things. Here's what I know, and kind of laid out just some of the facts. But then he said, but here's what I don't know. And the feedback from his employees, and this is a 4,000 person organization, it's not small. They said in that moment, he became a human just like me. He didn't know how to teach math to his eighth grader. I didn't know how to teach math to my eighth grader. And so you just think about so many times I think leadership, especially senior leadership, thinks that they need to have all the answers. They just have to remember that at the end of the day, human beings crave two things. They crave connection and they crave purpose. When you provide the purpose, you help create the connection. And that's what I think, as we move forward, leaders are really going to have to show the human side of who they are because of technology advances and AI and all of those pieces. So and then the last part about how do you help people navigate that uncertainty? It's just constant communication. You can't talk enough about the direction of the company because people can't get enough of what that looks like and what that sounds like.
No, it's great. And I love the idea of framing those three questions for leaders. And I often say that, and I'm sure you've heard this before, I call it the 5 word culture killer. And that's when you ask a leader something, they respond with these 5 words. It is what it is. And to me, nothing crushes a soul faster than that phrase because it literally gives zero context and is not, it's a non-answer answer. And I feel like that's sometimes, this may come across more in that middle management level of like when you go to like your manager say, hey, why is leadership doing this, leadership doing this, and then the response is, it is what it is. What advice do you give to someone to not say that without, I know sometimes it is what it is probably apt, but it also makes you feel like shit. So how can we frame that answer in a way that does not make the person receiving the response feel like garbage?
I think there's 2 things, and that's a really great question, by the way. Um, first and foremost, when I hear that phrase, I I look at the person saying it, and my immediate reaction is, "What aren't you telling me?"
Mm.
And so immediately there begins to be a level of distrust. I think that this is something I've really learned from studying leaders and managers, over the years, is that oftentimes, that phrase or, "We're just gonna do it because we were told to do it," um, it's really bad management and leadership, and I think sometimes managers believe that they have to know it all, have all the answers, and they forget the power of active listening and asking questions. So if an employee's coming up and questioning why we're taking this direction or why we're having to do something, it's getting the employee to tell you why they're feeling that way. And then we go back to the thinking about the why piece. And when you can kind of come together, the manager and the employee and just have the conversation, oftentimes, I think you create that light at the end of the tunnel. But the other piece I would say about the "it is what it is," one of the things that I learned in the Gallup organization is that we all have aces and we all have spaces. And think about how most mid-level managers get to that position. They were really good as an individual contributor. And sometimes individual contributors can make that leap and it's flawless and it's seamless. There are others that probably should have never been put into those positions. And that's a trigger to me to say that person needs a little bit of leadership development because you're basically saying, I wouldn't ask you to do it. They're telling us we have to do it. And then you begin to drive that wedge between the employee and the organization. And so just as I have led teams in the past, they all know, to your point, that is not a phrase that we that we use or we articulate.
And so, some advice, because I know over the last few years, and you've seen it, is that the word manager almost has like a negative connotation. Like people don't even want to be called a manager because there's something about that. And there's been like 6,000 books written about don't be a manager, be a leader. So, what can the manager do there so they're not forced to give that answer? Is it more something that they have to be proactive with their leaders to be like, hey, listen, if that person comes to a question and I don't want to say those 5 words, right? Is it something like, hey, let me go investigate and then let me go to senior leadership and see, and almost like put it on the leader's plate to be like, hey, these are questions we're getting. How do you want me to answer it? And I think sometimes middle managers are afraid to be told what to say. But sometimes when it comes to things that only the big boss with the hot sauce can answer to, I think that's their only move other than saying it is what it is.
I completely agree, and I think about it as a cascade effect. So anytime that there is a new goal, a new initiative, a change in direction, whatever it may be, I just go back to that strategic alignment piece. Senior leaders have to be saying, "Here's where we're headed. Here's why it's important." And I think the critical piece is, "Okay, John, you are the head of this business unit. Here is what your business unit needs to do in order to help us achieve that goal, meet that initiative, course correct." Because then what he can do is internalize that and say, now, how do I go to my team and say, this is our remit to the organization. This is why we need to do, X, Y, and Z. And so then it just continues to cascade down. And when I see organizations that are really well run, who really believe that they have high engagement and they have good communication, it is that cascading effect. But again, I just go back to it really does start with senior leaders. And what I do say to middle management is this: you are the mouthpiece for senior leadership. If you don't understand, you do need to find out why.
Yeah.
You know, the second piece is, but you're also the feedback mechanism for the boots on the ground, the feet on the ground. And so when I look at organizations, it is that level in the organization, that middle management, that is the linchpin for most everything. But they're oftentimes the most smashed, right? They're getting a lot pushed down on them, but they're getting a lot from the ground up. And so if I were to say, where would you want to spend leadership development time and treasure? It's with that group of people because they are that critical conduit, both up to senior leaders, but as well down to individual contributors.
That's good. Good stuff. You mentioned trust a few times there, and you write about how it takes years to build trust, but seconds to lose it. Can you share an experience where you've had that, where where just it took a second for trust to be broken, and it's really hard to build it back? I mean, I mean, it's the old, like, maybe, very religious, like, and some people throw this around and say, forgive but not forget. Tell me about this trust and what happens when trust is broken, whether it's intentional or tensional.
Right. I can give you a really great client story. This particular client builds the engines for rocket ships, literally. And their flagship manufacturing facility was way out in the middle of a very little populated state. And they had to, because you're building engines for rockets, and it's a very dangerous, form of work, and we had just run this company's annual engagement survey, and we tend to look at a lot of different, slices of data, and one of them was by location. I knew that this location was the future of the company. It was They were placing their bet on this location. They had the lowest engagement scores by far in the entire organization. And so my role is to come in and talk with the CEO and help her to understand where you're betting the farm. These people aren't loving the company, and and by the way, their safety scores were abominable,
Mm.
and trust in leadership was abominable. And she said, "Chris, I know. I need to give you some context. 2 months before this survey ran, we literally had an explosion at this plant where people were literally left running for their lives." And she said, "Not only did it cause a breach of trust in myself and the entire company, but when those people went home in that small community, it touched everyone." So this wasn't just a company breach of trust, it was a community breach of trust. And so it took her of over 2 years to get that plant back to where they would actually open up to her, and where trust scores actually kind of went back up to where they needed to be. So, literally, life or death situation. That one's pretty, that example's pretty dire, but she had to visit that location over and over and over again. Visible presence, listening, doing all those things. And we here at WSA drink our own champagne, and we had a really great rocket ride for the first 7 years. I mean, we were double digit growth. We were adding people faster than we knew, what to do with. Business was booming. And then we hit kind of a big bump in the road, and it really shocked a lot of people at WSA. And it really did erode trust between our employees and my business partner, Zach, and me. And we are now 3 years later, and I can finally tell you, we're back to where we were. People are back to firing on all cylinders, and, I will say that last year was a really tough year in our business, but this is a team that said, "We're with ya." And I will say, hard conversations for a good 2 years, and being open to fire away. What's on your mind? What are you thinking? Why are you mad? I mean, we had so many different, listening posts and conversations because we just knew that, um, we had to do it, and we had to be out front and not kind of hide in the sand. So
Good. Let's talk about the engagement surveys and the stuff that you do. There is sort of this feeling about around polling, right? That like not everyone's always going to be 100% truthful when they're being, when they get a random call from somebody or stopped on the street. And I wonder if any of that bleeds into engagement surveys. Like, how do you factor like the plus minus of they're being 100% completely honest, or they're putting on the survey what they expect leadership to hear? Tell me about this idea of the honesty and the integrity of engagement surveys.
Well, I think that there are a couple things, and I don't want to get too technical, but um, there are items, and then there's always a rating scale, right? You have to be able to put a score to how the workforce is feeling about a particular topic. The out for people is twofold. One, you can agree, you can disagree, or you can be neutral on something. And so that neutral piece, I think, helps avoid some of that. I'm just going to tell you what I think you want to hear. We also have an NA option. So I can say this is just not applicable to me. So there's some things just in the mechanics of the survey itself. But again, this is now going to come down to communication. When employees realize I can give honest feedback and you do something with that that makes my experience better, I can't give you enough feedback. And what the other piece around that is we would never showcase an individual's responses. So in our technology system, it's hardwired. If there aren't at least 5 people who respond to a particular item on a manager's team, you're not going to get a score because we do have to protect that confidentiality and that anonymity. But I believe that initially, as you think about how can you make people feel comfortable, one, it still goes back to senior leaders. They have to say, "We're doing this because we want to hear from you." Then it is the follow-up actions, but it's also reminding people that, when we ask for your feedback, can you name a time that we went on a who hunt? There is no who hunt, and so people just, over time, the more that you are asking for feedback and acting on that feedback, and people see that it benefits them, they're far more likely to say, "Okay, I can be honest." Now, I'm not naive enough to believe that there aren't people on every survey that we run, that we call them speeders. It's like, "Wait a minute, it took them 30 seconds to take the survey and everything was a 5 or everything was a 1." It's gonna happen, but you have enough of the mass, that it doesn't tend to affect the score as much as you would think, so.
All right. So when you get these results, and if you're able to talk about this, and you bring it to a CEO, and going into the CEO's office, like he's not gonna like this, or she's not gonna like this. Have you ever done that and you felt like you were holding up a mirror that they did not want to look into? Like it was so against what they thought the results were going to be, that it was almost like they needed a moment to like take in what you just showed them.
It it happens, more often than you would think,
Hmm.
and it is oftentimes I actually use the Sarah model of going through grief. That
Wow.
there are CEOs that will first it's shock. "Why didn't I know this? What's really going on with my people?" Then I've seen it move pretty quickly to anger, which is, "We pay these people really well. We think we're giving them the best experience. You're never gonna make everybody happy, right?" And then they just kind of my role then is to keep them moving. Let's get you out of shock and anger to let's just maybe accept that this is what, your people are saying. And I always go back to this was a point in time and this is how people feel. You just used a survey as the vehicle to understand that. They already felt that way. We just provided, the data in a survey. And it's really interesting. Several years ago, we were working with a medical device company. And we had been working with them for several years. And going back again to how we look at data, There was a particular division of this medical device company that had consistently, for the past 2 years, been the lowest scoring division in the company on engagement. Well, my partner and I were in the boardroom giving the detailed readout of the results, and the CEO got a phone call, walked out of the meeting, and never came back. And that is not something you ever want, as a consultant. You don't want the CEO. So when the presentation ended, I went up to the head of HR and I said, "Did we say something to offend him? Is he angry?" And she said, "No, but we did just have the largest product recall in the history of our company." And I said, just out of curiosity, "What division?" And when she told me, I opened up the presentation and I said, "Look where this division falls. It's been the lowest on engagement for now 3 years running." So if we could have gotten his attention earlier to say, "This is a ticking time bomb," um, because it didn't go so well for him, after that recall. So I think it's our job to get them to work through that. The survey didn't reveal something out of thin air. It's how people have thought and felt, and in some ways acted. We're just bringing science to it for you. This isn't just how we feel your employees are feeling. There's science to this now. And executives are data-driven people. And so if I do my job right and well, I'm using facts and science and data to say, "No, this is what 3,556 people felt." And now that you know it, here are 1 or 2 things, 1 or 2 actions that if you take them, you can move the needle. You can move engagement in a positive direction.
That's great. I want to double click on a couple things. So earlier, when you talked about like revealing these not so great results to folks, one of their initial reactions is, "Why didn't anyone tell me this?" Does this go back to where we talked about earlier, where just no one felt comfortable telling the boss that there was a problem before it got there? I mean, is that generally what happens, or is it even more that the boss is so? And sometimes it could be the boss being like, "Hey, I'm in my office. Leave me alone unless there's a problem." Is it a mixture of that?
It is a whole mixture. It's everything, that you just said. Some think about this. In most corporate office buildings, where does the C-suite sit? They're on the top floor. It's, gated. People can't just walk up there. What message does that send to the rest of the organization? Now, I get it for some security reasons, et cetera, but it sends a very clear message, that we are more important than you. I always say to senior leaders, you need to be out in your locations. You need to be walking the halls, interacting with people so that they can see you. So sometimes I think it is that. Sometimes I believe it is they just they're busy people, right? They're running multi-billion dollar organizations. And if you look at the majority, and I'm not faulting this, but if you look at the majority of senior leaders, CEOs, what's their background?
Sales? No.
Finance,
Oh.
accounting. And so by the nature of that work, they've grown up interacting more with numbers than they have people. And so I think sometimes again when you get to that level and rightly so, they have fiduciary responsibilities, right? They can't just not care about the numbers, but I always subscribe to people get done through work. Well, it's the same thing as you think about hitting your numbers. It's your people who do it. And so I just think sometimes they're too caught up in thinking about data and numbers and not necessarily thinking about people. And then there are some senior leaders who they just aren't people people. And they're not going to have that comfort level. And again, I just go back to that trust piece, right? That, um, I think leaders oftentimes think that they have to be infallible, and the more they're interacting with their people, the more they may trip, the more there may be that misstep. So, yet it is always pretty shocking to me, when senior leaders have no idea, that there could be some pockets in the organization that really don't think it's a great place to work.
Hmm. And then another thing I wanted to go back on was you talk about these surveys happening a moment in time, and you mentioned a couple, like one happened after like an explosion, the other happened after a recall. Um, how does recency bias play into a lot of these, and the, just for lack of a better word, timing of these surveys have to do with the culture? Because I know, as you mentioned, like a couple of those are pretty extreme. So if you had done the survey 3 months prior, maybe everyone had been five hunky dory. We love the boss. We love it. We're all fulfilled here. Tell me how you not manipulate, but how do you contextualize the moment in time in which this survey takes place?
Well, I think it's, everything that you said. It's really understanding what is going on in the organization. I mean, there are times where if there'll be a CEO change, and if you do a survey 1 month into that CEO's new tenure, I can give you exactly what's gonna happen. People are gonna be nervous. They're gonna be unsure of the future. They're not sure what it means for their job. What we would say is, why would you do that at that point in
Right.
time? Let's wait 3 months, 90 days. Let's get his or her strategy out there. And so it's as much about just having the conversation about when is the right time. But I would also say in that explosion incident, if we would have done that survey 2 or 3 months before that happened, I believe the survey would have been the canary in the coal mine, because I don't believe that that incident happened just by chance. And it was around very specific cleaning protocols. And when you think about it, and engagement is a really stable measure, it takes a lot to move it. So my hunch here is that engagement was already low at that facility. And one of the things that we just know is that disengaged people work less safely. They pay less attention to detail. They're less conscientious. And so in that particular instance, I believe we could have given her an early warning indicator light, that may have helped prevent the severity of what happened. So the context, I think, to your point, is real, and it's our role to ensure that we understand what is going on in the organization, and is it time to press pause, or is it time to go full on?
I don't want to go deep into this, but like talking about the timing of these engagement surveys, do you have context when you go in? Do the companies tell you, oh, by the way, CEO is just fired? I know this is kind of a bad example, but are you aware of what's happening when the surveys takes place, or is it one of those things where you'll do the survey and be like, oh, but we should have mentioned this to you earlier, but there's like a sexual harassment thing that happened? How much information do you know going in to prevent, maybe the survey happening at an inopportune time, or like you said, waiting 60 days for some time to pass? Tell me about how, again, and I don't want you to spill company secrets here, but I just want to know, how much do you know going into those engagement surveys?
Well, we're getting to know each other, but if for those who know me well, I will never go into a situation blindsided. I want as much information as I can. And so the good news is, to stand up this point in time survey, it can take anywhere from 6 weeks to 3 months, just based upon the complexity of the organization. We're meeting with the client in that time frame, and that is always my time to say what's going on. And then I'm always going out on websites. What's company performance like? Is business up? Is it down? Because I always have a section or a segment of the CEOs that I work with who, as you started out this podcast, engagement, chicken or the egg. And for years, I've frustrated senior leaders when they'll say, "Well, when we're doing really well, of course our engagement scores are gonna be high because people are getting raises, we're successful." And the converse is also true. If we're missing our numbers and we're having to lay people off, it's gonna create a level of fear. And my response to that question over the years has always been, "Yes." And then they look at me, and I don't care. I know that there is a relationship between company performance and engagement, and so we always want to know, what's going on with our clients. So
How do you avoid? And people who know me, Chris, know that I am the anti-check the box person. I came from the entertainment world, so the idea of doing things for the sake of doing things is anathema to my being. And I culture, there is this. It's inlaid within it that you check boxes on things. With an engagement thing, I wonder, is there a check the box mentality when it's maybe you're dealing with the people or the culture people that we're going to do this engagement survey every February, regardless of what's going on in the world. Let's just do it February. How do you prevent that from happening with folks? Because, like we said, a lot of stuff could be circling around in February. Just because you did it last February doesn't mean you should do it now. But hey, listen, I'm checking the box. We're doing the engagement survey in February. How do you speak to your clients about that, about the timing and just not making it something that they're doing just for the sake of doing?
That is a big question, and it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. So for most workforces, consistently surveying, to your point, in February, it gets locked into employees' minds, and so they know in January, okay, there's going to be a communication that comes out that we're going to do this engagement survey. I still believe it's a bit more of a case by case basis because there may be situations in which we're probably not gonna get positive data, but if we don't do it, employees are gonna say, "You didn't ask me because you knew what the answer was going to be." So, there's a little bit of nuance to that in terms of if there are events that have been disruptive in an organization, and there are times that we will say, "It's not gonna be fun, but we still recommend, that you do it." And you've kind of led me to something else. You know, one of the things that we just know about engagement is it's inherent, and it is, I want to do this. You're not telling me to do a better job. I want to do it. And so I always cringe when I hear, "Yes, we threw a barbecue the day before we kicked off the survey," or "We're raffling off a 64-inch TV, for, anyone who completes the survey gets a ticket." It's like, "No, no, no, no. That is the antithesis of what we're trying to do." Or they'll run the survey right after they just gave bonuses. No, that is not the reason that we're doing it. So it's always, interesting to see how leaders can try to, game the system a little bit, and
The scale, as they say. Yes.
absolutely. Or they'll come up with the great idea that, "You know what? We're gonna tie engagement results to your bonus." Well, what is that gonna incent? I mean, wrong behaviors, right?
Five, 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 five.
Exactly, exactly. And I think the other piece about that is that, yes, this is an HR program, right? It is in human resources, but it truly is the best management tool I know of because it's giving you real-time data on what your employees perceive to be important to their overall experience. And so if this program stays only within HR, it's going to have a short shelf life and it's not going to have the level of credibility that it needs. You need leadership out there saying, "No, this is important and we're going to do it. And I may not like what you're going to tell me, but I need to know what you're thinking and feeling." So,
That's great. Great, great. All right, so let's finish on a philosophical note, if you don't mind, Chris. The difference between happiness at work and fulfillment at work. And I think for many people, they're intertwined, but I think you and I both know that being happy at work doesn't necessarily mean you're getting a lot out of work. So, as you've been doing this for, you said it, you outed yourself, you've been doing it for 30 years. For employees, what's the difference between happy at work or being fulfilled at work?
I love this question. Thank you. First and foremost, happy. Let's just take happy. If you had 100 people and you asked their definition of happy, you're gonna get 100 different definitions. There will be some similarities, but you will get 100 different definitions. That's one. The second piece about happy is this: whether we all like it or not, we come out of the womb and we have some hard wiring from the very beginning of our lives. There are people that just inherently are happy people. No matter what happens to them, they see the silver lining in everything. We also have encountered some people who that isn't a part of their hardwiring, right? And no matter what you do, you're not going to make them happy. So we find that measuring happiness is inherent in the person, and it's so dependent upon the environment. If you got in a car accident on the way to work today, probably not going to be in the best mood, right? If you had a fight with your kid before you drop them off at school. So there's so many things that can affect happiness and satisfaction. Here's why fulfillment is the important piece here. I want you to think about your life and some of the biggest growth periods you've probably had. You weren't cruising along. It was a big challenge that you took on. It was you were learning a new skill or whatever it was. It was not necessarily easy. It was probably really hard. But at the end of the day, when you look back, you say to yourself, that was a pivotal moment in my life. And when I mastered it, how fulfilled did I feel as an individual? And those stay with you the rest of your life. And there's so many stories in the book about moments when either a leader created an experience or the individual had an experience that led to massive growth personally, professionally. And people will literally say, it is in those moments that the trajectory of my life changed forever. So that 85 cents in the gas tank for me, that changed the trajectory of my life forever. I didn't want to do that anymore. But then I can also celebrate that there were some amazing moments where, I had a seminar leader who believed in me and put me out in front of 30 cantankerous restaurant managers to argue about an interview. That changed the trajectory of my life. I knew that's what I wanted to do for a living. So I just think it's really important to segment those two concepts, and it really is about fulfillment.
Awesome. And you can read all about it in The Enduring Impact, The Art and Science of Crafting an Exceptional Employee Experience. She is Kris Erickson. Kris, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Kris and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.